is we said, okay, we want to hear students' voice. Part of listening to what our student voice was bringing our First Nations community in and talking to the First Nations students. We had a meeting with the students, and it went very well, and we'll talk about that. Before we had that, we were down in Toronto for a conference, and we heard a guest speaker of Dr. Dion, right? And some of the things that she was saying to us is about student voice and how important student voice is.
Yeah, after going to that conference in Toronto, I think one of the things that was really important for me was the whole aspect of research. Dr. Dion talked about being more inclusive and talking about focus groups, but storytelling and getting all that stuff. One of the things that myself being a researcher, one of the things that is problematic about research is that for First Nations people, we feel that we get research to death, right? Like people come in, they do research, we've been studied, we've been analyzed, it's the whole colonial aspect of things. But the way we wanted to approach going to the students was, I had said to Craig, I says, let's just ask one question, I says, and let it flow. Allow them to guide the conversation as opposed to us coming in with exact questions, like, you know, saying, and get exact outcomes, because as a researcher you can very much have a series of questions to get the answer that you want, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to be able to let them tell us what they want, as opposed to, you know, us saying, okay, this is what you need.
The greatest thing about that is when I came into the meeting, I said to Brent, I said, okay, how are we going to do this? Before the students showed up, and Brent hit it right on the head. He goes, let me start, which is a great idea. They hear from the principal all the time. They need to hear from Brent. They need to hear from our communities. So he said, let me start and let me just open it up and let's see where it goes. So we went ahead with a meeting and we asked the question, and I might refer to some of my notes here, and I apologize. We're looking at, you know, how did you want to see yourself reflected into the school? And that's kind of the first question that we asked them. And, you know, they sat there for a minute and then they started to talk. Once they started to talk and started telling us some things, it opened up a whole bunch of the students talking, which we were so glad that that's what happened, because that's exactly what we wanted to happen.
One of the key points is that they really want to see more First Nations teachers, and the reason being is that they find it problematic that you know, you have non-Native teachers teaching them about themselves, right? One of the things to go expand on that is the history part, Native Studies part is that to be more inclusive and to be local, to look at local history, to make their ancestors, make their community a part of that history. Like, you know, you can talk about, for example, is like, why would you sit in a classroom in Native Studies and learn about the Haida Gwaii when you're Lenape living in Ontario, right? Like, they want to know their own history, their own migration story. How did we get into Ontario? Where did we come from? Stuff like that. So it's key that local history, it would be key to that success of that kind of course.
And that's so important for them because they are our future elders down the road. They need to know the history. They need to know the story. So in the schools, we need to bring that local community, local culture into our classrooms. And that was huge to hear them say that to us.
The big key for me was the relevance. The biggest thing that I got out of what they were saying is, how is this education system relevant to my life? How is that going to benefit me going forward? And I think that's one of the big, for me, when I was growing up and coming to RDHS myself, because I went to school here, was when I got into university, I started learning more about science and about my culture and about the science of my culture. meaning our relationship with the land, our relationship with the environment, our relationship with spirit, all those different things, and realize that our culture is rich with science. It was about relationship. So if I had known that being in high school, I think I probably would have got into more sciences, because had I known the relevance to the culture at a younger age, it might have created a different path for me, or a richer path, or whatever. Not that I regret anything, but to create that for the students now would be awesome. To bring those parallels in and say, no, this is how we see science. This is we actually do have a science to our culture, and it's relevant. And if we can learn the Western way and the First Nations way, then you'll only benefit. You'll only enhance your education. We totally changed some of the stuff that we thought, because we've had conversations before, me and Greg and a couple other people, of what we could possibly be doing, and then getting into that room with them and bringing up points that we had never even thought of, right? That we aren't all knowing as adults. There's that old adage, kids are, to be seen, not heard, right? And whereas it's totally different within First Nation cultures, is that, they are the future. We have to look at 7 generations ahead. Future. What is going to be there for the next 7 generations? So in order to do that, you have to engage each grouping, each students that come along, the children, the grandchildren, all of that. So it's key, and it's vital to understanding relationships, is that elders or adults might be the authority sometimes, but it means nothing if you can't give kids what they need and what they're looking for in a healthy environment.
And it doesn't matter what you do, collaborative inquiry or whatever. This is about students. This is about improving achievement. This is all about the students. So who do you go to ask what they need and what they want? The students. That's very important. So yes, going forward with collaborative inquiry, it's going to be a key part when we go to our meetings and plan where we're going from here. Because we can always come back to this and say, remember the student said this. Mm-hmm. Oh yes, okay, now we can implement this, now we can change this or whatever. That's a good focus for us. And that came right from Toronto, even with Dr. Dion. She said, here are 4 things the students are saying. This is their voice. We started with that and we work with that, and that's important.
The other part is that the collaborative inquiry is that you have to have meaningful dialogue with the First Nations. And as the Ministry of Education, or as the Lambton Kent School Board, or any school board, you have to have that meaningful dialogue. And you have to be able to say, okay, what do you want? Hear them, hear what they say, and actually do it. Yeah. Because they're not gonna enter that partnership until they actually see some action.
Coming out of that meeting with the students, now we go into our collaborative inquiry meetings. We bring this data, we bring what the students are saying to everyone, and then we can make those decisions what's going to be best for the students in the school. And the students are saying, we want our cultural days, we want in the art class, we want to learn about moccasins. In phys ed class, we want to look at some of the games. Now, as in partnership, what we do is we go to the teaching staff and we say to them, okay, how can you implement this into your curriculum? And that's whether that's a 1 lesson day, whether that's a unit, whether it's a breakdown of 4 or 5 days, then those teachers can take that and add it into it. So in phys ed, they can do a section on games, but they would bring in the professionals or the people from the community who can teach the students those games, or teach them how to do moccasins in art class, or in language, or in English, and whatever, right? So now that's our role, to go to the staff and tell them and help them and teach them and guide them to say, okay, where are you going to go with this in your individual classes? And so,
yeah, and I think that's one of the key things about the collaborative inquiry is that you always have to go to the students first. Like, you can talk to the teachers and you can go on what they evaluate as what the students need, but it means nothing unless you actually go to the students.
Say as principal at the school, being a part of the community, you have to be part of the community. You have to be in that community. So you know what, when you go to the Delaware community, you have to get there. You have to go visit them. You have to go and get involved. And that's a great relationship that we have, and we're continuing to build, is that we do that. So one thing we did this year with our staff is we went to out to Moraviantown, and we had parents' night out there. So the parents just came to, we went to their community, and the parents came and talked about their kids. That's relationship building. That's a really important thing. Once you have that relationship and that trust, you can do all kinds of things that you need to help students, and that's the bottom line, is you're trying to improve the student achievement.
And the whole thing about ownership is very true, is that, if the students believe that their voices are being heard, they take ownership of that. They take ownership and they take responsibility, right? Because the key is that, okay, we're going to them, we're asking what they want, so we're going to show them that we heard them, so we're going to start giving them that. But again, it comes back to relationships. It has to be reciprocal, and that's the key to learning, is giving them that responsibility, and then they can pass on that legacy. I think that's the key, is that they, once they have the stories of how great their learning environment is, they'll pass that on to their siblings, to their cousins, and them coming up from the public school into the high school. Well, we do a powwow every year, and I want to be a part of that. For one thing, in Moraviantown we have Lenape Heritage Days. This is the first year we've done it in a long time, but we have that in October. So bringing that aspect to the school as well is like, in October having Lenape Heritage Days, and bringing aspects to that to the school, because our kids are here, and or also bringing the school,
Yeah, that's right,
like the whole school,
yeah,
and their peers to come out to an event that we have Lenape Heritage Days. And the root behind Lenape Heritage Days is that every year for the Lenape people, our people, we had a 12-day ceremony every October. And it was basically a recreation of creation. Is that we gave thanks, it was a ceremony of thanksgiving, of acknowledging the powers that be. It was about ceremony, it was about heritage, it was about storytelling, it was about, identity. And, we're trying to recreate that in the community, and, to bring in other people, so it's rooted in the First Nation. And that's very key, in being collaborative and sharing that, because one of the things with genocide and with assimilation and with the history of colonization is that we were oppressed because nobody understood us, because they were afraid of the primitive things that they saw. But if we share the depth and the richness of the knowledge in our relationship with creation into the school, and bring people into that they will see that that there's nothing to fear, that we don't need to fear each other, that we don't need to see ourselves as separate, but as people going forward in a good way, and enhancing and enriching our educational journey through knowing Western ways, but more importantly knowing First Nation ways, and melding those two, are going together, and creating something wonderful and amazing, so that we have that awesome relationship with